more on these developments, let's go now to Alexander Clackson. He's an advisor to now independent countries that were Soviet republics. Alexander, thank you for your time. Now, Putin has been quoted as saying that he's not concerned about NATO's new members unless they deploy military infrastructure. How might, do you think, Finland and Sweden's accession into NATO impact the balance of power and, more directly, the conflict in Ukraine?
Well, in my view, I think the overall expansion of NATO towards Russia's borders has been one of the prime reasons for the escalation of the conflict with Ukraine. Russia has, on numerous occasions, has said that it is the danger of Ukraine joining NATO that has pushed Russia to take military action in Ukraine.
But was that actually about NATO expansion, or was it just about Ukraine joining NATO, which is two different things? He seemed to say he didn't mind NATO expanding as long as it wasn't Ukraine that it was expanding with.
I think it's a combination of things. Obviously, what matters the most to Russia is its security. What that ties into is actually the NATO military hardware that is placed on Russia's borders, which is why Putin has said that he doesn't mind that Finland and Sweden join NATO, but obviously Russia will need to take steps if NATO military hardware is actually placed close to Russia's borders. And that's the same situation with Ukraine, because over the past few years, we've seen that NATO cooperation with Ukraine has increased substantially. We've seen NATO training Ukrainian forces, for example, and NATO military hardware has been placed in Ukraine, despite the fact that Ukraine hasn't joined NATO yet. And that's exactly what pushed Russia to take military action. So I think when it comes to Finland and Sweden, what Russia will be looking for is to see whether NATO military hardware is placed close to Russia's border, and if so, Russia has said that they will take a similar action on its side of the border to prevent, NATO kind of taking charge of that territory.
Now, Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov said that Russian armed forces don't target civilian infrastructure, but another 21 civilians have been killed in a neighbourhood near Odessa, and that follows the attack on the shopping mall earlier this week that killed 20. Do these targets have any military significance?
Well, it's difficult to say, of course, without commentary from Russia. I think previously Russia has said that the Ukrainian army has used civilian buildings to house, weaponry and house soldiers. They've also used them to attack Russian outposts. Each case is different, and so for this particular instances, it's difficult to say.
It's a common and expected line, though. We're talking about a shopping mall and a residential apartment building. I mean, if these civilian areas were part of the strategy for Russia to target these locations, it would essentially be illegal under international law, correct?
Yeah. As I said, look, it could be the issue of just a rogue rocket hitting a building that wasn't supposed to be hit. There is another line of thought which perhaps says that Russia is essentially just trying to cause some kind of terror in Ukraine, to push Ukraine for a ceasefire, essentially for Ukraine to lay down its weapons and sign a deal with Russia which is beneficial to Russia. So it's difficult to say. As Russia is kind of running out of precision rockets, one of those two options could be true. Whether Russia is using less precise rockets, which can essentially land anywhere on the Ukrainian territory, or whether this has been a conscious decision by Russia to target civilian areas for the purpose of essentially creating fear and terror among the Ukrainian populations, and thus pushing Ukraine to essentially sign a ceasefire deal with Russia.
You mentioned the rockets here. From what I understand, they are outdated Soviet-era missiles. Does this mean that Russia is, you mentioned that Russia perhaps has run out of the high-precision missiles. Is that the case, or are they saving these more modern missiles for other areas, other occasions, perhaps?
Well, I think this, what Russia calls military operation, has perhaps lasted longer than Russia has expected. So in that regard, it is likely that Russia could be not so much running out of precision rockets, but they may not have enough of them to essentially take over the Donbass region. And so for that reason, they have to also rely on rockets which are less precise. And that's the kind of the analysis that we also heard from the let's say European intelligence, including the the UK and the US intelligence. So in that regard, it is likely that Russia has been using less precise rockets. Nevertheless, it's unclear at the moment whether they have been the ones that have hit civilian targets or not.